Hi there, I'm Elise Chapins, and I'm here today with Daniel Andre, the writer and director of the new film Running on Empty, coming to video on demand on August 27th. Thank you so much for joining me today, Daniel. I appreciate your time.
And thanks for having me. I'm glad to be
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah. So this is just a really unique look at death and dying. Can you talk about what made you want to center that subject in particular in this movie?
Yeah, I think it's a subject that whether we like it or not, we're all going to have to face in some form, whether us or those we love or people we know or just life in general. I think, when I was one of those kids that kind of was always had those big questions on my mind. I would, have trouble falling asleep because I'm thinking about what happens when we die and what's the whole meaning of life and all these kind of big questions for a little kid. And I think in a lot of ways they kind of stuck with me. And so I think when it came to deciding what to do for my first film, I wanted to do something that was fun, and kind of whimsical in a way, but also that did have a deeper meaning to it, and that maybe could spark some question within the audience, with something relatable. And I think death is very relatable.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that you kind of created was this kind of interesting funeral viewing kind of thing. Was there something that inspired that specifically, or was that just an idea that you had? I just found that really like quirky and interesting. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So I've never seen that done before. However, when I was sort of researching death and morticians and funeral homes, before I wrote the script, or when I was getting ready to write the script, I came across something called, so in the film it's called Adventure Funerals, but there's
Mhm.
actually a thing called Extreme Funerals if you Google it. And they do similar things where, they'll put people in mock-up cars or sort of, yeah, playing cards or, smoking a cigar, whatever. And when I saw that, it was just, it hit me. And it also, I think, it sparked this sort of, not a question, but it was sort of how death is looked at, particularly in this country and our society, as a very morbid thing. And it's very much kept out of the eyes of the public, except for funerals. And even before finding the extreme funerals, I was very conscious about how in other cultures, death is much more about a celebration of life. And that was something that I also just sort of wanted to put in there, especially when we're dealing with death. And it is such a morbid subject, or at least people think it is. And
Mhm.
I guess I was attempting to, or wanted to attempt to sort of maybe make people realize that it's not as morbid, or maybe to look at it more as a celebration of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think that is kind of interesting because there is, even just with the advent of like the funeral home and the funeral director, we've really kind of distanced ourselves from death. And I think the film does kind of address that to some degree of the way that we've kind of separated out there. Yeah. So kind of
Yep.
shifting a little bit, I saw that you talked about this kind of as an anti-rom-com. Can you kind of like talk
Yeah.
about what you mean by that and how you kind of weave that into the film and the discussion of death?
Sure. So for me, I mean, I love rom-coms, even, big commercial ones and, older ones like Notting Hill and things like that. Um, but at the same time, I was trying to do something sort of outside the confines of that. And to me, the anti-rom-com aspect of it is, with him and Lucy, it's less focused. It's more focused on his journey versus a love story. And if I could think of like a inspiration, is like a good example would be, After Hours, Martin Scorsese.
Mm.
And though that's not really considered, a romantic comedy at all, it sort of its catalyst was a romantic comedy-esque type of thing where he meets a woman and he goes downtown to see her, and then she, you know he kind of, it leads him into this weird um story, and follows him through all these weird characters. And so that's kind of more what I was going for. I think it's a little lost in the final edit,
Mm,
because I think it's hard, especially as a first-time filmmaker and an independent filmmaker, where film producers, companies, everybody sort of wants to put everything into a box. And so like originally the Lucy Hale character, Kate, wasn't actually introduced, I think, till I think it was about 40 minutes into the film.
mm,
And that, so that structure was more of an anti-rom-com thing. But I think, during its edits, and after I got off of the edit, I think it was, kind of, for time and for other reasons, kind of squished to fit into more of a commercial type of box. And at the end of the day, it is what it is, and I'm happy with what it is. And I think that art in general, especially collaborative art like this, you have to be open for the film to take on its own life and to sort of land wherever it lands. And, I guess a real good example of that is casting. Of
mm.
course, when I was writing, I had ideas about this person and that person, but once you get it, once you finish it and you start going out to actors, you really have to let all that go. And what I found, if you would have, I never would have thought of Jim Gaffigan while I never did think of him while we were writing it.
Right.
Um, but when it all came together and when it all happened and when the film was finished, I look at it now and I don't see it any other way, and I don't see anybody else playing those characters. And I think as a filmmaker, you have to keep yourself open, and you can't get attached to this idea or that idea, because then in the end you're just going to be miserable.
Mm.
And you also have to let the other collaborators on every level do what it is to collaborate with you. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, were there, when you were doing research for this, I know it's kind of interesting. There's this almost like death social media kind of thing that exists out there, like with funeral directors who are these like influencers, I guess. Did you look into any of their work or anything like that? Were there any that you kind of look to for ideas or anything in that?
Not particularly. As far as the research I did on like morticians and funeral homes was really, it started out with being more just general to like the business of funerals, and looking into that. And then I guess the stranger part and the more comedic part came from the adventure funerals. And I just sort of fictitiously incorporated that into what a funeral home kind of really is nowadays.
Right on. Yeah. So obviously death is a really serious topic, but even in just daily life, there's a lot of humor in it. I know when I think to like pretty much any funeral I've attended or after somebody close to me's died, even in the most horrible feeling, there's like humor there. So how did you kind of try to balance the seriousness of the topic and then with the humor in the film?
Yeah, I think that was sort of a line that we had to ride the entire time, from writing it to making the film, because it is a serious subject, and you never know what other people are going through or where they're at in their understanding of death. So it was a trying to be respectful of how it is in our world, but also leaving. I think that's also why there are sort of more bombastic or kind of strange or odd things in the film, because it sort of takes you out of the world in which we live in and takes you into this sort of alternate universe or alternate timeline where we've gotten past all of the weird hangups we have about death. And just to kind of note another thing, I think that maybe entered my mind subconsciously was, when I was 10 years old, I went to my grandfather's funeral, and it was more traumatizing than anything, I think,
Mm,
and especially, we went to the wake and went up to the casket. And even at that young age, I think it was about 10, I knew that wasn't my grandfather anymore.
right.
And so I think I was also trying to sort of with sensitivity, sort of portray that and let us know that, that we can be respectful of it, but at the same time, this is why it should be a celebration.
Yeah. So was there anything, kind of as we wrap up here, as you were writing this film and creating this, was there anything that you kind of changed about your own views about death as you kind of went through the process of, examining it through this film?
Yeah, it's strange, and I've mentioned this a few times, but I grew up. I had a probably a pretty big fear of death as a kid, and I always wondered about what happens to us when we die, and why are we all here, and that kind of stuff. And it's lessened as I've gotten older. And this wasn't on purpose. However, once probably within the last year, once the film was finally done and all put together, and I had a chance for people asking me these questions, I came to realize that I think I've lost my fear of death, and that wasn't my intention. That wasn't my reason for tackling this subject. I just think it was just a really interesting byproduct of not only going through the experience of making the film, but just where I am in my life with a lot of other things, whether it be just work, spiritual, creative, what have you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for sitting down talking with me today. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, thank you
Thanks for
for
having me.
for allowing me to take a look at the film. I appreciate it. All right.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Have a great day.